Dean.
Konrad, how you doing?
Hey man, good. Nice to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, man. It's a perfect day out here in PE at the moment. There's like zero wind out there, and beach is looking amazing. Eh? Goodness
Isn't
gracious.
it?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Always
Absolutely
Easter
perfect.
time, ready for Easter.
Easter, cheap is this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easter, Pesach, Eid, all coming together within a 10-day period, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the seventh episode of the As Above, So Below podcast. My name is Dean Konrad.
I'm Konrad van Staden.
And always, as always, just incredibly grateful to be able to have these kinds of conversations, turn the microphone and the camera on, and really welcome you, our audience, from wherever you may be watching from. Please drop a comment in the comment section below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Dean, we've had a few comments coming through this last week, since the last one. I think most importantly, please keep the comments coming.
Yeah.
We absolutely love it. It gives us some direction as to where to go, and also I think we want to raise some awareness, and we love to get some banter going on some of the comments as well.
Yeah, on those platforms, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's what we're striving for, is a little bit of engagement and back and forth in terms of not just some of the things that we say or some of the things that we hope would spark interest for people, but really just to be able to build a community of people that are willing to brave the wilderness, for the lack of a better word, to have these kinds of conversations around what it means to be thrown down a well, and have to, for some Christian audience or Old Testament audience, around Joseph and his brothers, and he gets thrown down a well, and what does it mean to have a conversation when you feel like you have been thrown down a well, when everything else that you knew seems to change overnight. What does it mean to have a conversation with people around that stuff? So as that audience grows, it's always a privilege to have those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. I think just to give you guys some kind of idea as well, as in terms of where we're going, Dean and I have discussed just opening up to the possibility of obviously extending and looking at the communal mystical dynamic of religion and psychology. And I think we share a huge sense of commonality, a huge area that is a mutual area of seeking, and maybe divergent areas of theoretical understanding, but a common area of experience. And I think what's so interesting for me about it is that the closer we move towards the end of life, the more that common area seems to be crystallized into a very common understanding and experience.
Yeah, I definitely believe, as we've had many different types of conversations, I think I've always thought that good psychology is always good theology, and good theology is always good psychology. And when I think of the person of Jesus, and when I think about his interpersonal relationships with the various people that we get to read about in the Gospels, I see so many good connection points in terms of what it means to be with people, be in relationship with people. Jesus' engagement with authority, Jesus' engagement with people who are, in inverted commas, below him, people who are on the same page as he may be. Even his relationship with his mom. We don't often talk about his relationship with his mom. Just a basic relationship that for the most part most of us have to deal with our moms and mother-in-laws to a certain degree. But when I think about Jesus and the way he interacted with people, it is a solid compass for me as I go through life on a daily basis, what it means for me to raise kids, have a relationship with my wife, have a relationship with other people. I seem to always go back to Jesus in terms of the way he interacted with people. And I think as we move closer to Easter, these are some of the key moments that I sit with at the moment in terms of reflecting on, meditating on, praying on his life, and on Friday his death and resurrection. So I find these kinds of conversations invaluable in terms of what it means for me to have relationships with people on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that we often think about it like this, and religion as a structured, patriarchal, hierarchical, this is how you should live your life, super ego structure within a psychological sense, has had such a negative connotation. And I think, you know, you and I discussion with around this, our thinking is that we want to change some of the dialogue around this and the interaction and the experience in such a way that we start to understand the spiritual and soul dimension in how the two come together. And you know, there's just plenty of ideas and concepts that we still have to flesh out. So for the people out there, I want to say, bear with us, because I think one comment that we've had is that we move very fast from one concept to the next. And as the podcast develops, right now it's perking interest, but we'll start to develop specific comments and concepts and ideas and processes and really delve into it. And as you say, you know, the idea of what does it mean to use the understanding of the life of Jesus, Christianity, as, from my point of view, as a transformational psychological growth. And how do we also use it to move closer to understanding the mystical and the unknown aspects that lie within all of us. And as we grapple through life, we start to naturally have that religious instinct that draws us closer to understanding the mystical side within all of us and in the world around us.
What do you think are some of the initial key markers that lead us down wanting to have those kinds of moments, you know, whether with ourselves or with other people? What do you think pushes us or nudges us in those directions? Like, what makes us want to do those things?
I'm not sure that there is a want. It's interesting that you mention that, because I think a lot of the experience that people have is a drawn feeling. There's a light in the distance across the earth that draws us closer. It seems to be a natural yearning to try and understand ourselves. It seems to be a natural yearning in terms of the religious instinct, which I believe is a central part to us as human beings.
Yeah, good.
And I also think that then there are certain things that happen to us. So I don't think it's a want to. I think there's certain things in us that are activated. But in my experience, people, for instance, don't come to therapy. And I've heard similarly, people don't come to God. And it's probably an argument of a lot of people when they say religion is a crutch. Because I believe that people start seeking when they are confronted by their shadows, when they're confronted by an incident or a life event, an illness, a loss, that is of such great magnitude that it touches them beyond the boundaries of their ego. They cannot deal, they cannot understand it, they cannot cope with it in the ways that they have always coped with it.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a breaking open of that.
And so is that those structures just don't work anymore? Like, it just doesn't work anymore. The childhood structures that I've built have now taken me to an adult phase, and it just is not going to work anymore.
Yeah, I want to say yes, because I do think that's true, but I also think there's something else, that's where the instinct comes in, because I think there's a natural sense of something beyond that then catches you and draws you from the other side. It's not just, because you see, I think so many people go back to just coping the way that they always have.
Well, I think that's where I wanted us to kind of potentially go down, is because we do at some point become 60, 65-year-old men who are still dealing with teenage issues. I don't mean puberty and testosterone. I mean, although maybe for some, we're still dealing with the things we should have dealt with in our teenage years. We should have dealt with this when we were 20, 25 years old, but we seem to be fighting the same demons in our 60s, that we should have dealt with a long time ago. So is it something that stops us from jumping off the rocks to swim across the ocean to go see what's there? Do we listen to the siren calling? Do we go for it?
It seems to me that what we need to do is to take that leap. But we need to understand that the leap that we're taking is a treacherous journey. It's not to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
The leap that we take, when we listen to the sirens, it leads to our death.
Yep.
Unless we are prepared and we fasten ourselves to the mast. We have to be able to guide through this. So I think there is always, I think there's many people that find a way of jumping into a situation which can be very destructive, but is based on some sense inside of them that the journey to take is necessary. So I'm thinking about how many people come to see me in therapy, yearning, driving, and I mean when I've had a lot of contact with the church and processes in the church where what fascinated me was how many people were burning to involve themselves in the deeper spiritual dynamics of the church or in a psychotherapeutic process. But that fire burns out very quickly unless it's sustained by something else. In psychology, it is the ability to delve into something inward, to not look at where you're going, but to also hold one foot, or say it like this, being tied to the mast, and something stern, something that is concrete. You have to look at how you go from the one side to the other, and you have to be tied to both.
Is that a motivation of the self to want to step into that place? I mean, I'm the only person that can really convince me to do that thing. Having kids has been one of the greatest, probably the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. But I joke, also probably the worst thing to ever happen to me. Like it is this weird paradox.
Yeah.
And so when my son drives me insane, and I lose my temper, or I get a little bit angry, or I lose my mind for a split second, and upon reflection about it, once the kids have gone to sleep, and for 5 minutes they're sleeping, and then all of a sudden I miss them because I wish they were with me again, I have to think about the fact that the reason he irritates me so much is because that thing exists in me. And those things that irritate me the most about him is what pulls me out. It's the things that I've got to, that shadow that I have to deal with in myself. And so the reason those processes begin to take place on a daily basis is because I've got to go, there is actually a child in the room. I can't be the child. I have to grow up to be an elder for this child, for me to be able to take him further along the path. Otherwise, at some point, we just lose touch. And so, for me, and Daniel is turning 7 at the moment, and now his vocabulary is through the roof, his attitude, I want to say, is through the roof, he's growing on a daily basis with his intellectual and sarcasm. Believe it or not, his freaking sarcasm. And then I've got to go, where does he get that sarcasm from?
Yeah, I wonder.
And then I've got to sit back and I've got to go, I've done this to myself. I have done this to myself. So in that moment, when I look in the mirror, I've got to go, bro, it's you. In this process of raising this child, I am being drawn to a mirror to look at myself and go, I've still got some growing up to do. I still have some growing up to do. When I lose my temper in traffic and my son sees me lose my temper in traffic, all of a sudden he out of his own shouts at a taxi, and I go, no, we mustn't shout at a taxi. Oh, but wait a second. Who showed him how to shout at a taxi? Not his mother. Me. It's me. So I've got to, at some point, go, okay, I have to move beyond myself. I've got to think about how to take another step in the direction of what it means to mature, grow up a little bit, take that leap of faith or that step, as you were saying, tie myself to the mast and go, we've got to go for it.
Think about the shadow and how we find, we've spoken about how we project onto other people our shadow. So the parts of ourselves that are not accepted, that we don't like about ourselves, we project onto others. And it's this projection onto others that becomes the mirror of who we are. And it becomes the parts of ourselves that before we can grow any further in this growth of life and transformation and maturing, we have to look in the mirror and we have to see the parts of ourselves that we become so offended by. Note, I use the word offended. I think that shadow work and the understanding of what it is out there that offends us requires a process of introspection and humility.
Yeah.
And I want to go one step further here, and I want to ask you about what you think of this. But the places we need to go to, the places where the divine spark lies, is in those places where the shadows, it lies in the projection of our greatest mistakes, our greatest parts that are not us. It is where you, as you say, shouting at a taxi and you look at yourself and there's this mirror that comes up. And what is the feeling we get there? There's shame, there's guilt, there's anger at the other. And then there's inevitably, when we look in the mirror, there's shame, there's guilt, and we want to look away. We want to hang ourselves for what we've done, for betraying Jesus, for betraying ourselves. We then have to look at that, and that's exactly where we need to go. It's exactly, and I want to go to what you discussed. Saul, Paul, on the road.
Yeah.
He's his greatest mistake in this world, his greatest evil that he had to face in himself, is the killing of Christians. What does he become? The greatest, most prolific writer of the Bible, right?
Yeah.
We need to go to the places where our greatest mistakes are. And so often, I get people, and I'm sure you've had it as a minister as well, that you get people coming to you, they are enshrined, they are shrouded, enshrined, that's a Freudian slip. They are shrouded
Yeah.
in shame and
Yeah.
guilt.
Yeah. Some of us are very proud of our shame and guilt,
Yeah. They are shrouded in, and they cannot move beyond that. Because the ability to accept that part of myself, talking of what you said earlier on, is so destructive of the existing way that I'm living. What happens if I accept? But no, that's not me. What was it? The famous Hansi Cronier, the devil did it.
Yeah, it wasn't me. Yeah. I think we've unfortunately systematically been trained to live in a transactional grace when it comes to these things, with ourselves as well as with other people. Is that I'm only allowed to relax once I've worked really hard. I'm only allowed to treat myself if I've cleaned the house. Can't treat myself before.
I'm thinking about what does transactional grace mean? How do you understand that? Help me understand the concept.
Well, I've got to do something to deserve love, don't I? Like how else? So the world we live in says, for this to happen, you've got to do that. We live in a world that says we go on a date with somebody and the guy pays for it, and what does that mean for the girl after the date? She's got to put out. And so we live in a world that says, yeah, that's the way it works. Flowers on Valentine's Day means you're probably going to get lucky. And so what we've done is we've built that quite cleverly into our society that says, if you do this, then you can get that. If you do this, then you get that. So transactionally, we go, if this happens, then that. And what we've done is children have grown up in households where the same thing applies. If you clean your room, you can watch a bit of TV. If you eat your vegetables, you can get some sweets. If you do this, then mommy will love you.
So what's the opposite?
Opposite is being brave enough to go, even because of all of my mess ups, I'm still accepted and loved. Now that is a place that takes stories like the prodigal son to go, even all of those things, your father will still make a space for you, and you are accepted and you are loved. It is an unconditional grace and an unconditional love that we haven't got space, we haven't got time for it in our society. Because we don't understand it. But that thing that you're talking about to go, even all of those things, when I look in the mirror, there is an unconditional love that exists that goes beyond anything I think I could ever understand. And I have access to it. And I think Easter is that time in that place where even on the cross, Jesus goes, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know. Forgive them.
I was thinking about this podcast and number 7 being such a significant number of completion. 7 being such a significant number in nature, 7 days of the week, the 7 original planets as thought of as the process towards the afterlife. And this process of completion, and you said it, your son's turning 7.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I think about the idea of what are we completing here. Podcast number 7. What are we completing on the day before we head into Easter? And I think we're talking about what it means to create a feeling of wholeness within each of us as human beings. What does it mean to create wholeness in terms of a society?
Mm.
What does it mean to hold a symbol that can allow us to create wholeness not through hard work or through, like you said, doing more, giving a bunch of flowers, but wholeness through an acceptance inwardly.
Mm. Yeah.
And
because the alternative is thinking I need to make up for something.
yeah, it's an act.
I have to make up for something. Sure.
Yeah, it's an act rather than a state. So if you go into the state of grace, if you go into the state of self-love, which I'm still grappling with that idea, that thought, that phrase rather, but if you go into the state of internal work, then you're taking responsibility. And I was thinking about this, over Easter. What am I going to do? I'm going to spend Easter, obviously doing the normal things, spending time with family, most important part, and excuse those that are vegetarians, but I'm going to be having a massive leg of lamb.
Worthy is the lamb.
Worthy is the lamb, yes, most definitely, and it will be revered. And I will also be spending time contemplating, spending time with myself, because I think that is my duty to myself and the people around me.
Mm.
And I was thinking about it, what does it look like when we're talking about Easter and this preparation for the rest of the year? What does it look like for us to delve into work on ourselves as instruments of society and in the fabric of the world around us? What does that look like? What kind of practices do you think would enhance or be vehicles for that transformation?
Because I think if we stopped, and let me rather say, if I stopped thinking that I constantly needed to do something to be accepted or gain the approval of others, or to constantly feel the need to bring flowers to every situation so that I can be accepted, I'm not bringing my whole self to that situation, because I'm too afraid. There's too much shame attached to that. What if they see the real me? What if I do bring me? What if they see me and they don't accept me? So when I think of the Gospels, when I think of Jesus, woman at the well, woman caught in adultery, even all 12 disciples. We spoke about the cross last week, where a man hangs on the other side. Jesus uses language like, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. Jesus sees people and goes, you're okay. You don't have to add anything, you don't have to take anything away. You're okay. I'll meet you there. And so I think a real starting point for me is real prayer and contemplation around who I am, what I bring to the table, who I am to the people around me. And I think there's two sides to that coin. The one is deep gratitude. Just, I am grateful. Thank you that I have what I have. And then on the other side of the coin is a deep, make me more aware of the places that I'm not grateful. Because I think there's always a tug between those things. I've never arrived, but I'm in the process of arriving. So I'm so grateful for what I have, but in the same breath, make me aware of what I don't have and make me grateful of those things too. Like constant chasing a dog chasing his tail. I have a tail, but I'm going to keep chasing it, you know. And I think I want to be as grateful as possible, but I want to also be as humble as possible to know that there are some things that I'm not aware of that I should also be grateful for. Thank you for the things that I get to see, but make me aware of the things that I don't see yet, that I still have to see. And so for me, the first thing to try and answer your question is, I would hope a deep contemplation for who I am and what I am to the world around me, to the people closest to me, to my friends, to my family, and who I am when I come to the table. And I think being brave enough to accept the grace and the love of the unconditional grace and unconditional love of God, to walk in that, I think is a step one for me. Is really a step one for me, yeah. What comes to mind for you?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think grace is a portal to open up awareness of who we are in relationship to others. And it also at the same time opens up this idea of, going back to what I said earlier on, the idea of looking at the parts that's in conflict, that doesn't, because I think that's the really important part for me, is that we start to look at the conflicts within ourselves, that we're able to meditate and contemplate the internal conflicts, because that's the internal mirror. The emotional feeling that we carry of anxiety, of depression, of anguish, these are all symptoms that are indicating an internal...
They're indicators, eh?
Yeah, they're signals for something that we need to look at. That's going to bring us to our knees until we acknowledge the part that we don't want to see. And that is where real pain and suffering starts. It's not a glib intellectual acknowledgement. It is an emotional experience of that core that is the parts of that. So as an example, I can think of things so often where I sit with people that feel ashamed about a particular behavior or thought or experience. And when you go into that with them, inside of it is an idea, but I'm not like that. I don't know why I do that. I don't know why I think that or feel that. And when you go in that and beyond that, they start to suffer that feeling, and they start to look at it. And it's like Plato's cave. You stare into the light, and initially you're blinded, but you titrate it, you expose yourself, and eventually you're able to see it more clearly. Where you spend time in contemplation, you spend time walking across the bridge, and spend time. Jung for quite a while, when he went through his epiphanous experience, he would go up into his tower. He had this tower at Bollingham, and he would go in there and lock himself up, and he would go into the darkness of his own soul. But during the day, he would be with his family. He'd be working to remind himself that this is life, and that is my soul. I have to grapple, and I have to have some foot in reality. So you have to walk across the bridge, go and experience this, expose yourself to this, and exposure therapy is something that's been around for a long, long time, and that's kind of what we do. We expose ourselves and we titrate ourselves to the starkness of this emotional thing that we're dealing with, instead of avoiding it. Like a confession.
Would there be similarities there to Jesus spending 40 days in the wilderness by himself? Really coming to grips with that stuff. And then he has this moment with the Satan, where he has these 3 moments of temptation in the desert. Now there's deep, deep soul work there. 40 days by yourself. That's a big deal. That
40 days. 40 days for quaternity.
Yeah.
I think the idea that you spending that amount of time confronted by your own shadow, the darkness in you.
Yeah.
I think I'm the way means that I have shown you how to go and do this.
Because the Satan in that moment addresses 3 very key moments. He's like, do you want all of the world? Do you want this stuff? All the riches? You can be king, man. Do you want all of it? I'll give it to you. I mean, that's the thing we deal with, right? We want it. All the riches, wealth, popularity, fame, fortune. I want it. But Jesus goes, we're going to do a different thing. We're going to do a different thing. So for 40 days, he's wrestling with himself through all of that stuff, and that is where the temptation takes him. And to a certain degree, every man goes down that road. Are you willing to do X to get Y? And so when I think about Easter, when I think about Jesus' betrayal, when I think about him in the Garden of Gethsemane, it takes me to a place where Jesus goes, I don't want to do this. But, God, your will, not mine. And I think there's an interesting moment there to go back to where I was talking earlier. In this contemplation moment, there has to be a moment where I go and I surrender the things that I think I want, and I say, not my will but yours. And within that process of looking in the mirror and looking at my own ego and going, no, not my will but yours.
Dean, I think that everybody knows that the self, capital S self, as Jung speaks about it, the authentic, real inner self, knows when there is a betrayal of yourself.
Yeah.
It is witness to the process. And I think we have to go out there and expose ourselves to the difficulties of life. We have to go into the shadows. There's many different reasons why Jesus, people are always going about the humility of Jesus. But I think there's also a reason why he went into the darkest places and had relationships with some of the darkest people. It's because you need to go there to experience it yourself. That's being human.
Yeah.
And only when you fill that out, or you have, sometimes it's necessary for us to go to those places. And we want to judge those things. We want to say, no, don't go there. Don't go there. That's bad. But we look at it as the ultimate goal of the soul to transform. It needs to go there. So very often I've seen couples, as an example, what comes to mind now is couples that go through an affair. And maybe it's something that's necessary to happen for that particular individual to go through their own personal growth. I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's, go out there and it's okay. But there are ways that is healing to individuals and couples. There are things that need to happen in this world. We need to go out into the desert for 40 days. We need to go into our own wilderness in order to delve into that depth.
Why do you think the religious, and even, you can look at the New Testament, but we can look at the last 2,000 years of the church, Why do you think it's the religious knee-jerk response to throw stones at the darkness? Is it, as we've been saying, we shy away from the shadow, we shy away from the mirror, easier to judge from a distance than to sit at the table with a Zacchaeus, than to sit and be labeled a drunkard because he's hanging out with the prostitutes and the...
Well, I have to question the modern church. I have to question whether or not people are just doing jobs, whether or not people are fulfilling, and it happens in psychotherapy as well. It's easier to say to somebody, yeah, I understand, it's okay, I'll give you permission to rather do this. Yeah, it's a good idea to go and do this. Rather than confront them, to go down the road less traveled. It's much easier to do that. It's much easier to...
it's easier, eh?
Yeah.
I think I'm reminded of Jesus' language, you're the salt of the earth. Salt has to be added to something. It can't just be salt. What's the use of a pot of salt? Unless added to certain things. One to add taste and the other to preserve. In the ancient world, salt was used to preserve meats, look after things.
My wife was so she had such a smile on her face yesterday, because my son makes a mean steak, right, at his tender age, excuse the pun, but he makes a mean steak, gets it absolutely perfectly, but it's never salted properly, because he puts the salt on at the end.
Sure.
So it can't absorb,
it
can't amalgamate.
Yeah.
So finally he got it. He got it. You got to put it on in the beginning. It's got to draw in and become part of it. And I guess that's the way it is. For starters, he became aware of something, and that's humility. And so he said, no, he'll change that. But on the other hand, it's also the metaphor for we have to grapple with the things that are good for us, that become all part of us and integrated into us. We have to go and seek out those things, and we have to connect with it at the right time. Hey? So we've been talking about all kinds of little different things and little nuggets of how to transform and how to connect and how to fetch and find parts of ourselves. And it feels like today's podcast and discussion has been this dreamy kind of session that we've had of meandering through and touching on different things. And somehow it also feels that there is something that is incredibly rich and important on the other side of this. And I think, I know we're starting to draw to the end, and I'm wondering whether or not this is the essence of how we talk about how to live life, is to dream like the little prince, to meander and connect and feel something inside of us that takes us through this journey, and to connect to things that are truly important and soulful.
Yeah, I got to reread The Little Prince now that you've mentioned that. Yeah, I like the language you used earlier around the art of living. And what I loved about it is art suggests nuance. It suggests grays. It suggests tones of. It suggests a color palette of tones. Not a. It's not a cut out simple 1 + 1 is 2. Like actually no. 4 minus 2 is also 2. And
1 plus 1 is 3.
well, there you go. And it depends who you ask, right? And I think in that art of living, what it means to be salt and light in the earth, not just kept in a jar, but to add flavor, to add to the existing society, that is what we are called to do. And I think that art of living that you talk about, and this dreamscape that you were talking about, is, for me, nudges me more. And even today, for me, today's conversation has been so helpful, because what it's done for me is gone, how do I be more deliberate about looking in the mirror and going, it is okay for you, I give you permission to live freely and at peace in the world with yourself. Like you are allowed to live at peace with yourself. And almost for me has gone, just stop fighting with yourself. Just stop beating yourself up. You're okay. You have some friends and some family around you who really love you. The nature of the universe and the nature of God is that you are loved over and above everything else. You are loved, and that's okay. And that is for me the meaning of Easter. That is for me the meaning of Easter during this time. And I think I just want to sit in that pond for a bit. I think I just want to just want to sit there for a little bit and then meditate on that. Yeah.
Well, on the completion of the 7th day, the 7th year, the 7th podcast, I wish everybody a really good Easter, Pesach, Eid, and till we meet again. And may it be a weekend of contemplation and a weekend of interconnectedness and a weekend of beauty.
Yeah. And if I may be so as bold as to say, peace be with you. Wherever you find yourself in the world this weekend, peace be with you. And my name is Dean Konrad.
I'm Konrad from Staden.
Cheers, Konrad. Always a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.